Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Governance Playbook webinar series. Our session today is how to continually refresh your annual board strategy. My name's Sean McDonald, and I'll be your moderator for the next 40 or so minutes. During our session, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A buttons at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be answering as many of these as we can across each section. Finally, if you stay through till the end, we have a special treat for you by answering a quick 1-minute survey. At the very end of the webinar, you'll go into the draw to win a beautiful gift hamper worth $400. For those of you who don't know BoardPro, we're a board software provider that serve over 13,000 users around the world. We enable organizations to run their board meetings more effectively with less time and deliver more impact and value for their organization. Now, as much as we're a board software provider, part of our wider mission is to make the fundamentals of governance free and easy to implement for all organizations, especially those with resource constraints such as small businesses and non-profits. So today, let me introduce the speakers for you in today's webinar. Brett Hurt, of course, is our co-founder and CEO here at BoardPro. Brett is a serial entrepreneur, having built several high-growth businesses over the last 20 years. Good afternoon, Brett.
Kia ora, everyone. Great to be here. Thanks, Sean.
Steve Bowman is Managing Director of Conscious Governance and brings a great depth of experience with board reviews and strategic planning. Steve has a wealth of executive and governance experience and has written over 14 books on governance and strategy. Good afternoon to you, Stephen.
And hello, everyone from around the world.
Martin Oxley is a professional director and investor who provides governance support primarily to SaaS businesses that are expanding internationally. He has a vast technology-based career spanning 30 years. Good afternoon to you, Martin.
Hello, everybody.
Now, just to let everybody know, we will be providing a recording of this webinar, and there'll be a white paper as well as the presentation slides provided to you after this session. So there's no need to write anything down furiously because all of this will be provided to you. So Brett, our webinar series, as you know, is centered around what we call the 3x5 governance playbook. And as creator and author, would you like to explain why you created the playbook and what value it delivers?
Sure. Because our software business services predominantly small to mid-market organisations and not-for-profits, we've observed over the years a significant portion of our customers who are partway along their learning journey and building their governance maturity. And we really just saw the opportunity to provide some simple, encompassing frameworks to think about governance and to think about running the board process really well. So this is one of the outputs of it, where we simply say, look, there's 5 core processes, 5 inputs and 5 outputs. And if you do those 15 things well, you've set your board on a good pathway to create the kind of future that you envisage. So if you just move on through there. So with the slides that Sean will just run through one after the other, will just give you very briefly, you know, what are those 5 things that feed in. So today, we're talking about refreshing, you know, your strategic mandate or your strategy. So we're running a series of webinars on each of these, and you'll see increasingly on our blog, and we'll post some links to that during the course of today, the ability to go and find templates, guides, recorded webinars covering all this material. And you'll see in the new year, we'll be publishing CEO and share checklists to further help that process. Back to you, Sean.
Thanks, Brett. Okay, Mr. Bowman, it's over to you.
Why, thank you, sir. Look, today what we're going to be talking about is some very powerful yet simple techniques to actually continually review your strategic mandate, your strategic plan, you know, the key strategies that you've got as an organization. And before we get into those there's at least 10 of them, and I'm pretty sure Martin will have another 3 or 4 to add to that as we go along as well. What I wanted to do is just remind people of why we're even looking at strategy. And one of the things that I urge people to consider, particularly directors to consider, is what is the function of our board? Now, there's a whole conversation around that, but my view on the board is its role is very simply to make the choices that actually create the future for the communities that we serve. And so therefore things like strategy and risk and governance and finances, they're all tools to help us create the future. But our role as a board is to help create that future with and on behalf of the communities that we serve. And we do that through the products, the services, the ongoing creation of the difference that we make as an organisation. And if our role, therefore, is to create the future, then we need to be pretty aware of what the future might be, what it could look like. And one of the things that we need to be looking at is understanding that the future is constantly changing, always changing. You know, one of my favorite phrases, if you've already figured out what the future is going to be, you're going to be mightily disappointed because it's not going to be that. It's going to be something different. So we need to, as a board, therefore, to be constantly monitoring these activities. And if you start to look at it as a board, your key accountability document is not your financial report. Your key accountability document is your strategic plan, because that helps us identify how we're creating the future and what it is that we need to do to be going there. Okay, so that therefore means that if we know that the future is constantly changing, and we know that our key accountability as a board is to actually create the future, we'd better be looking at it on a regular basis and doing things that actually help create a greater awareness of what the future may be and what are the strategies that we need to put together on that. Now, before we get into the first of them, which is structuring the board agenda, Martin, your views on this? You come across this all the time. What do you come across?
Yeah, I agree with you. Obviously, for smaller organisations, finances and staying alive is pretty important, and that usually tends to be pretty close to the top of any agenda. But if you're not looking at the future and deciding, where you're going and how you're going to get there, then it just becomes, an exercise of just on a treadmill. So, of course, finances are really important, particularly if you're a small organisation just starting, or a not-for-profit that, is trying to eke out donations and so on and so forth. But, what you're about is a pretty important thing to understand, and it needs to be embedded throughout the organisation, really.
Yeah. Good points. So here's the first of the key tools. These are all really simple, and some of you will say, yep, doing that, good one, well done. I guarantee there's some that you're not doing as well as we go through it. So let's just go through them. So structuring the board agenda is probably one of the simplest things that you can do to help keep our board focused on actually reviewing our strategy, because what we tend to do is to have a whole lot of reports on how busy people have been. What we really need to be doing as a board is really highlighting those strategic items right at the very start of the agenda. And more we're starting to see board agendas where they're actually a heading that says strategic items. So those all those things that are actually related to either the strategic plan or new strategic issues that have come up typically get more time at the start of the agenda rather than at the very end. The other thing that we've noted that some boards just don't use this for whatever reason is that all those items that come to you as a board that are for noting only, no discussion needed, no decision needed, they're just for information, they're for noting only, really should go at the end of the agenda. And in fact, in many agendas, we see what's called a block agenda, which is all those items that are only for noting are put at the end of the agenda, and at the very start that they're approved as having been read, and therefore you knock off about a third of the items that go to the board meeting for reading or for noting. The other thing that is really interesting, we're starting to see now that more and more focus on creating dashboards, and we'll talk about that later on, but the dashboard is really useful, particularly for those items that are being monitored. So that if you want an update on the health of the organisation, a good dashboard report can be very, very useful. And if you want more detail about that, have a look at the CEO report template that BoardPro have put together. It's still ranking as the #1 download in this area in the world. So, get onto that, and I'm sure Sean will provide links to it at a later date. So again, still looking at the agenda, one of the great areas to have or sections in your agenda is something called, what I particularly enjoy, the title strategic gossip. A heading at the start of the agenda, sometimes at the end, but I prefer it at the start, where you have an ability for directors to have a conversation with the board about what they've heard, what they've come across, what's the gossip out there, what are you coming across, and what are the strategic implications for us. And it's an incredibly important part of the board meeting, because then you can start to get the input from the directors of some of the strategic issues that they've come across that have been highlighted by an incident or something they've read or something they've come across that is worthy of board attention, not necessarily at this meeting, but a little bit later on. Martin, what have you come across, how boards actually keep themselves on top of the gossip side of things?
That's a good idea. I don't actually think that we're always particularly good at it unless you put it on an agenda as an agenda item. Mm. And as you have said, Steve, the items that get covered the most thoroughly are the ones that you do first. Sometimes the most important ones, because sometimes they're a little more controversial, get left to the end of the meeting. And I've noticed lots of times by the end of the meeting, people are tired, they're rushing, other people have to leave or get on a plane or go off to another meeting, and it all gets compressed. So that's slightly off the topic, but I like the opportunity for research, and I like the idea that you program in, at various times during the year, some asking for a particular view of the market or a view of an area that you wouldn't normally have. And you often from somebody in management or maybe a report that you could purchase from somewhere, just to give the board a little bit more context. Remember, these people, if they do 50 hours on your business a year, which is basically a bit over a week, apart from the chairman or chairwoman, they're doing well. So often board members don't have all the time enough context, and so this gives a good opportunity for that, and I quite like that.
It's interesting. It doesn't matter what heading you use as long as it's there. When I was the CEO of the Australasian Institute of Banking and Finance, my board members were all the CEOs of major banks or the chief strategists from the major financial institutions, and they like the heading changes to strategic environment. And what that was just strategic gossip, what they'd come across and what they'd read. So it doesn't matter what you call it as long as there's the ability. The important part in there, though, is if someone brings something up, you can allocate 5 minutes to it, but also you can then say, well, if this were to occur, is our strategic plan currently robust enough to actually enable us to deal with this if it were to occur? Or do we need to do some further research in this area and get our head around what's happening? Good example might be someone who's come up and said, look, in the sector that we're in, I'm just starting to read some articles about artificial intelligence. And it's got me wondering about where that might fit into the cycle of where we are as an organization and the things that we're doing. Can we have a look at artificial intelligence and what that might be like in 10 years and maybe the implications for us? That's a good conversation to have.
Yeah, my 2 cents worth, Stephen, is I've observed the impact of, as we've run these webinar series and all the good folk we've had on there talking, you see consistently that the good board members, directors are future focused. Yeah. And I found it's influenced me to relook at my own reporting and CEO reporting. It's very easy for management and CEO to drift into the day-to-day, the month-to-month, because that's that's what we're living, and that's the cycle of reporting. And it's wonderful. We had a great director for the first 5 years or so, and his mantra was, does this agenda help us make the boat go faster? you know, borrowing from the yachting concept that's popular down here in New Zealand. And I thought it was brilliant. He would be challenging the chair to say, too operational, 2 months by month, can we get our vision up to the longer term and creating that future you talk about?
Yeah, someone's made an interesting comment that they tend to do these strategic commentaries in board alone time. My view would be I'd be doing it with our senior executives, because one of the things I'm looking for from my board is I want my board to be educating our senior executives into areas that they might be perhaps needing to have a look at. And you'll see as we go through, sometimes our senior executives can educate the board about some emerging strategic issues 3, 4, 5 years down the track. But the way we structure it is actually quite important. So personally, I would say this would be a senior executive or a senior leadership team plus board conversation rather than board alone time. Now, there may be good reasons you do board alone time, but the way I view the leadership team of any organisation is it is the senior executives and the board together, working together as the leadership team to actually create this vision of the future, the possibility of the future. So the key thing that I'd like to point out here is that you can have these, you know, conversations, but there's no point to them unless you actually then reflect on your existing strategic plan to see whether it's fit for purpose, to see whether or not there are other tweaks that you might need to make to it, or whether in fact it is robust enough to deal with the issue of whatever it might be, artificial intelligence, or, you know, the changing nature of big data, or the increasing need for stakeholders to have a better understanding of, you know, ESG, environmental social governance. Those sorts of things always reflect on your strategic plan. And just a little hint, it's probably worthwhile having it as a standard link on your board agenda so that directors can immediately pull up the strategic plan if they need to, rather than trying to remember what it says. So it can be quite useful there. Martin, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And one of the ways I've heard of saying it for board meetings in general, and you don't have to get too cut up on this, but, you know, we've got 25% of time allocated there to emerging strategies. And I think boards, you know, in general, you're thinking a third of a meeting on strategy, a third of meeting on monitoring, and a third of the meeting on compliance. Roughly. Now, obviously, this is industry specific. If you were in logging and construction, compliance, health and safety might take up more of your time because, you know, in my game, in business consulting or software development, you know, the worst thing we can have is a sprained ankle or a paper cut in general, but, you know, it's industry specific. So just somewhere along those lines is pretty helpful.
One of the other big things coming through, Sean, can we go on to the next one? One of the other big things coming through is the reporting protocols to the board. I mean, this is a big topic in its own right. And that is where we often find that the biggest complaint from directors, because we do lots of board reviews and governance reviews, and the biggest complaint from directors is the sheer quantity of information that they get. And this sheer quantity means that they are having to do a lot of reading, an awful lot of reading, and it does people's heads in. And the biggest problem with doing an awful lot of reading is you're still left with the so what question. Why have you asked me to read this? So what do I do with it? You know, it's all very well to have, yes, it's interesting and you should know, but so what? What do I need to do? So one of the biggest things that that we really recommend to boards to do, and not many boards get this where it needs to be, is to really look at a focus on key leading indicators rather than lagging indicators. What are things that will indicate to us what might be? We'll talk about profit and loss and balance sheet and so on. There's some great leading indicators that we can look at in there. But what are some of the leading indicators? What are some of the metrics? What are some of the dashboards that will give us trending information? Here's where it's going. Now, in 6 months, if it continues to go this way, here are the implications for us. Or in 12 months, here are the implications for us. And then what are the strategic discussions around these trends or these implications? So really looking at changing the culture of the board, where the board thinks it's great to have more information about what has been, to a board where it's thinking it's absolutely imperative that we start looking at what might be, not just what has been. Brett,
now
thoughts?
we have a number of questions that have come up over the last 4 or 5 minutes. Brett, do you want to just go through a couple of them there?
Yeah, there's one in the chat here for us, Martin and Stephen. Is it good practice to have a third-party independent facilitator running the strategy session as opposed to a board member exec, team member running it? I think we should split that into both the sort of formal refreshing of strategy, say once a year, and the ongoing strategy discussion you're talking about, Stephen. And I'll just kick off the first part by saying we've, if you look back through our library, you'll see a webinar we ran on 8 steps to a beautiful annual operating plan, and we talk specifically about that topic there. But the short answer was yes, it's generally always better to have an external facilitator for that formal strategy day. Back to you, Stephen.
Yeah, I think there's a few elements in there. I'd really like to be able to train my senior executives up so they could run these things, but then also have an external facilitator as well in some instances. Most of what we're talking about today, you should be doing internally and just bringing in expertise when you need to. I would rather my senior executives and my board be strategic, and when you have an external facilitator coming in, they're actually helping to facilitate rather than relying on an external facilitator. Martin?
Yeah, look, it really depends on the length of time you're spending on the strategy. If it was just in a general board meeting and the board meeting is, what, 3 hours or something, then, you know, it's problematic for that. But if it was a half day and it was a half day on strategy, absolutely. And if, like Brett said, it was a full day, absolutely. It's always better to have an independent facilitator, because it's very hard to both facilitate if you're a senior manager or if you're the chair, and contribute and hold it all together. Actually, if you can afford it, it's great to have a facilitator and a scribe to record it. But I know that a lot of you guys would be smaller organisations. Not all can afford that. But I mean, that would be the best way to do it, because then it just frees people up to be able to contribute and be part of it. But it really, you know, is dependent on the length of the meeting and the ability to get people in like that.
Thanks, Martin.
Yeah, just as part of that, there's just leave that slide up, Sean, because I think that we'll come back to it in a sec. But one of the things that we're starting to see boards doing, and those who are doing it are reporting to me that it works really, really well, is that let's say they have 6 meetings a year as a board, sometimes 8, sometimes 9, depending on what your organisation's like. They allocate 1 or 2 of those board meetings to purely discussion around an emerging strategic issue. No minute taking, no agenda. It's not board work. It's a board meeting, but it is purely on discussing emerging strategic issues. And what I'm starting to hear is that works really, really well. So 4 out of the 5 meetings or 5 out of the 6 meetings would be around the usual board work that we need to do with all the agenda items, reports from subcommittees, finance and so on. But instead of adding an extra meeting, because it's very tempting to add extra meetings to things, they've actually started to use some of their board meetings, 1 or 2 of their board meetings, to have these strategic conversations. So immediately there's a 2.5 or a 3-hour meeting that doesn't cover the normal business of the board, but actually covers the really in-depth discussions about emerging issues. Sometimes I'll bring in external presenters to help kick these off, and sometimes they just run it themselves. But every board who's doing that is telling me that it's having huge impact on the culture of the board and getting them really focused towards the future. Brett,
just going to bring in a question here that'll answer a couple of questions in the Q&A. There was mention earlier of splitting the board time into a third each between strategy, monitoring and compliance. Nicholas just wanted to check he'd heard right. do you want to share your view? I think you commented, Martin, but do you want to share a view,
Yeah.
Stephen?
Yeah.
I mean, generally, I would say that's about right. Now, compliance is an interesting issue because where I look at compliance, I'm looking at the strategic implications of compliance. So things like risk and legislative and regulatory, but not just from a compliance perspective. Again, another great conversation, but risk management, people often see that as compliance. I see it as a strategic issue. As that, what are the strategic leverage we can get from managing this really well? So I think in all of this, yes, it's worthwhile looking at that third, but don't try and allocate your time exactly to that. It's more than just monitoring. Martin.
Yeah, like that was what I said. Monitoring is basically monitoring the performance of the company and whether we're running to the strategy or to the plan. Strategy itself, as Steve has been pointing out, is, the blue sky, what's been working, what's going wrong. I think he's going to be talking about that in a minute, that type of thing, a bit more of a helicopter view.
Just to add my view as a CEO, I would aim as a CEO to bend that to something like 60-30-10. If I can get 60% of the focus of the board on strategic matters, that helps me in my partnership with the board for creating the future. If I do my job well on writing, reports and documentation that the board can take as read, we can reduce their oversight. There needs to be time for some pertinent questions and for the board to probe that, is it really as good as it looks? And I'm aiming to get compliance to as minimal as possible if we do our reporting right. It's not always possible, but that's certainly my aim.
Thanks, Brett. Stephen, let's bring this in, shall we, and move ahead a little further?
We shall indeed. Just a little hint for everyone. If you have a board pack that is over 100 pages, 200, 300, whatever it might be, one of the simple little technique is to say to the CEO, the board will not accept more than 40 pages. Or 50 pages or 60, whatever it might be, but it's much less than what we've got. That gets the staff and the board to start thinking about what's really important for the board to be focusing its attention on. Okay, so the CEO's report, again, it's one of the most powerful tools we've got and usually not particularly well done. The key element behind any good CEO's report is that it should really highlight the key issues, not just a report on how busy all the staff have been. 4 or 5 key metrics in there that are absolutely the important things to give us comfort that the health of the organisation is where it needs to be. In particular, looking at the strategic issues that are arising, particularly from key risks. Again, another conversation, but risk is the flip side of opportunity. Risk is another way of looking at strategy. So what are the strategic issues that come from that I want the board to focus their time on? And then the other one that is really important for a CEO's report, and it's probably my favourite heading that I like to see in a CEO's report, is what is keeping me awake at night time. It's just amazing the conversations that will generate. And I guarantee you send out an 80-page board pack, I guarantee every director will go straight to the CEO's report and look to see what's keeping the CEO awake at night time. Guarantee it.
And as a CEO, Stephen, I'm thinking very carefully about what I put in that section.
So one of the other techniques is using external stakeholders to keep the board informed of key strategic issues. So what we've found works really well, and I've done this in all my boards, and every other board that's done this has reported it works really well, is that you invite a key stakeholder every 3rd or 4th board meeting to come along and present a conversation with the board for about 20 minutes about what are their 2 top strategic issues that they face in their sector and or their organisation. And then what do they see or what do they think the implications are for your organisation in the next 3 or 4 years? So typically you'd invite a real strategic thinker, someone who is really, really good at what they do from a key stakeholder group. Ask them what are their top 2 strategic issues in the next 10 years. And we don't want them to go through their strategic plan. That's not the point of this. What do they see as the top 2 strategic issues in their area of responsibility in the next 10 years? And what do they think the implications for your organisation might be in the next 2, 3, maybe 4 years? Then you thank them, they go away, and you then reflect on your existing strategic plan to see whether it is robust enough to deal with those potential strategic issues if they were to occur. The benefits of that, you're getting insight, strategic insight from someone who is relevant but not directly involved in your sector or your organisation, and that stakeholder goes away with a feeling that this board is actually strategic. These are the sorts of conversations they're having. So you start to really build up your stakeholder engagement and perception management. Another component of that is once or twice a year, I'd certainly be involving key staff and asking them to come to the board meeting, not to present on what they do or what's wrong or what's not working, but you invite them to look at what are the 2 strategic issues that they see in the next 10 years in their area of responsibility. So it doesn't have to be one of your senior leadership team. It could be someone who's in charge of a particular operational area, and you would ask them, what are the 2 strategic issues in your area of responsibility? Give them 6 months to think about it, to research it, maybe mentor through one of the senior executives. And then they come along to the board meeting with no PowerPoint, no big presentation. It's a conversation. Here's the area that I'm responsible for. I see the 2 major strategic issues in the next 10 years in this area to be the following. And then there can be a conversation about what that might look like. And then again, you would look at the strategic plan to see whether it's positioning itself if these big strategic issues were likely to occur. Martin, have you come across that?
Yeah, I like that. And we often have people come and talk, senior management. And I like the idea of just saying you don't have to do a big PowerPoint presentation or something like that, because I have found that there are often people that when they particularly if they're operational and they're not sales or marketing people talk the hind leg off a donkey, as you all know. So they have no problem in front of a board, but a lot of people are quite scared to come into a boardroom. So and all these people learned people were sitting down waiting for this, and they feel like they're on display. So it's really up to the board and probably the chair to make them feel welcome, make them feel at home, and just to relax, because otherwise I have seen it lots of times that quite nervous about coming in.
Yeah, and the other thing is that the CEO or the senior exec can help mentor these staff members. You're not there to destroy them. You're there to get access to their wisdom. And what that means is those staff members will have to do some research. They'll have to talk to their colleagues. They'll have to start thinking about the big strategic issues in 10 years in whatever their area of responsibility is. Marketing, for example, Martin, you said, we don't want them to come in and talk about marketing. I want them to come in and talk to me as a director about what are the top 2 strategic issues in the future of marketing in 10 years. And what do you think the implications that we as a board might need to start considering? Now, that'd be interesting.
Could I draw you, Stephen, onto the slide we're here now? I've been waiting to hear your perspective on this one, strategic implications.
Yes. So the key thing in looking at any board report is that a director should be able to read the report and immediately have an understanding of what is the so what from this. What is it that we need to be talking about? And it's really simple to do. So when you start putting a board report together, there should be a heading either at the front or at the end of that report that says strategic implications for board discussion. Now, take your profit and loss, for example. All right. So typically profit and losses will give you the historical information and maybe some forward trends. And if it's a really good profit and loss, it'll give you the reasons for the variance. Fine. Still, so what? What do we need to talk about? What are the implications? a little heading at the bottom of your profit and loss statement that says strategic implications for board discussion. Help focus the board on the implications, not just trying to figure out what the figures are. Same thing with your balance sheet. Same thing with any dashboard reports. Tell me the so what. What do you want me to talk about? What do you want me to think about here? What are the implications? Brett?
Yeah, look, I really like that, Stephen. It's just that going that step further. Just as a side story, we run in the sales and marketing team, we do a daily stand-up, and part of that process is to talk about what you've done the day before, what you're going to do today, and roadblocks going forward. And I'm working with the team to get them to say, well, rather than just say what you did yesterday, what value did you produce yesterday? And doing it myself, it's actually quite hard to do. It's easy to say I did X and Y, but why is that of benefit? So I think it's a muscle that needs to be developed.
Yeah.
The old why of that, why is that important, or why is really good. And sometimes when you get reports, it's a good idea. You can say, so what? I know another way of saying it is why. And it's a good idea sometimes when somebody answers the question when you ask why, you ask why again. And then why again, because if you keep doing that, why to each quick answer, then you really get to the nub of the issue. At some point, there is no further, you can't go any further. And so asking why several times is often quite insightful.
So, this leads us to the next one. So the first element we talked about was what are the strategic implications that you want us to focus on? The second thing is that we know that the gift of any director are the questions that they're willing to ask that no one else thought of asking. The gift of a director is not the things that they say, it's the questions that they ask that unlock the wisdom of both themselves and other people. A good question, the purpose of a good question is to unlock wisdom, not to make a point. It's to unlock wisdom. So if the gift of a director is their willingness to ask questions, why don't we help them? Why don't we actually provide them with some good questions that they may want to consider in advance of the board meeting, so that we don't just leave it up to the one or two people that might be good at asking questions. We start to create the culture within our board of actually asking really, really cool questions. So one of the things that you can do is when you put together a board proposal or a business case, have a heading in there that says strategic questions for board discussion, so that we can then get the board thinking about questions. And even if they don't like the question, they'll come up with some that's even better. It doesn't matter as long as they're actually having that mindset of curiosity and questions. And there's some great questions that you can ask. We can go back to, that's not the one we're talking about. We can go back to thinking about things like, okay, so here's a proposal, here's a business case, we've met all the criteria. Here are some strategic questions for the board to consider. How might stakeholders view this from your point of view as directors? Or how might this fit in with some of the other activities that we're undertaking that we haven't yet started? What are the implications there? See, the power of the board is that they bring different viewpoints and different ways of looking at things than what the staff do. And we may as well tap into that, but make it easy for them, provide them with some strategic questions, or even if you don't, still have that heading there because it prompts the directors to come up with questions.
Yeah, good idea. The quality of a director is directly proportional to the quality of questions they ask.
Yep. Absolutely right. So we come to the last tool that I've got for everyone, which is continually monitoring your strategic plan, and that is to do an actual annual review of your strategic plan. And it's a great technique. It takes about 3 hours. I would have your senior executives and all your directors involved in this, and in particular, if you can do it as soon as possible after your AGM, before your first board meeting, it is one of the most powerful induction processes for new directors who've just come onto the board before even they attend their first board meeting. So literally what you do is you get your senior executives, you'd allocate one strategy each to your senior exec, and they have a short presentation to this group, which is the senior execs and the board, about here's strategy number one, this is what's worked, okay? Now, as staff, this is what we see hasn't worked. Directors, what else do you think hasn't worked with strategy number one? Now, here's, as staff, what we think we may have missed. Board, is there anything else you think we may have missed under strategy one? Based on all those conversations, what do you think we need to add to strategy one based on that? And what do you think we need to take out, either because it's no longer relevant or we've actually completed it? And then strategy two, usually a different senior exec, what's worked, what hasn't, what have we missed, what do we need to add in, what do we need to take out, and so on. The power of this simple technique is that you start to have the two conversations that most boards will not have and don't know how to deal with. And those two conversations are, what have we missed? That's a strategic question. It is not a shame and blame question. It is not a, why did you miss that? Yeah, pointing the finger thing. We're always missing stuff. The only thing that's not acceptable is not asking, what have we missed here? But it should be from that sense of curiosity. And then the other part is what's worked and what hasn't worked. What has not worked is just as strategic as what has worked. What have we learned? What do we do? What do we need to change from this? They're all really powerful strategic conversations. Brett?
Oh gosh, I'm just looking at a couple. We've got a bit of wisdom going on in the chat forum. Keith, the quality of the answer is often influenced by the quality of the question.
Oh, brilliant.
And
Keith, I'm going to use that. Well done.
And tell it, I think I've got his name, I don't know if I've pronounced his name right. Failures happen by not giving the wrong answers, but by not asking the right questions.
Yeah, that's right.
Gosh, if we got nothing out of this than to encourage board members to ask good questions, there's another whole topic in there, Stephen and Martin.
And to help them do it.
Yes, how do we draw them out, get them to do it?
Yeah, well, I think
just to bring this back online, gents, this is a topic which we could talk for a long amount of time on, I know, but we've got 3 or 4 minutes left, so let's bring it on home, shall we?
Yeah.
Sure. So
can I make one comment? It is very good, and people don't like doing this, but to talk about what has failed or what's failing, what's not working. It's always more exciting to talk about your wins and the sales going up or the donations coming in or the services provided to the community. But it's really valuable to say, what have we done wrong? Where is it failing?
Yeah. What hasn't worked here is just a fantastic question. Now, someone's made a comment in there, the Q&A, which is their particular board love to give presentations rather than reports, obfuscate strategy. Any suggestions on how to influence them? Absolutely. The most powerful question that you can ask anyone who is determined to give you a presentation is to say to them, what's the biggest strategic issue behind this for us? And then just see what they say. What's the strategic issue behind this? And then that enables others, as well as that presenter, to start looking at a higher level. Very simple question. It works an absolute treat. Okay, so just summarising what we're talking about, continually refreshing your board strategy shouldn't be onerous. It should be darn exciting, because now we're starting to actually understand creating the future. So looking at structuring our board agenda, the reporting protocols about looking at leading indicators and the strategic implications, board time spent looking at emerging strategic issues, the CEO's report we talked about, external stakeholders. If you do nothing else, that one is brilliant. It really works a treat. Key staff, their strategic, what they see in the next 10 years are the big strategic issues in their area of responsibility. Strategic implications for board discussions, strategic questions, scenario planning we didn't really cover. one of the things that I would suggest strongly is that once a year or once every 2 years, you allocate one of your sessions to doing some scenario planning. You know, the potential maybe what ifs, maybes that may or may not happen, the whispers of the future stuff. Get an external person in or train your staff how to do it. Really, really fascinating. Okay, over to you, Sean.
We have one or two questions. This here from Jen. Do you share the board strategy discussion with the rest of the business, and how do you communicate your strategy discussions to the rest of the team and staff? We have probably a minute left. Would you like to answer that, Brett?
Oh gosh, I'm going to bounce that straight back to Stephen.
Back to Stephen.
Yeah, but it's really simple to do, really simple to do. Once the board have approved what the strategy is, it's not a staff function to develop the strategy. It should be done with board and the senior executives with some wisdom that comes in from different elements. But literally the senior execs or the department managers should sit down with every single staff member and ask them what they can do in their area of responsibility to actually help facilitate these particular set of strategies. You say to them, it's not about doing new things, it's about what is it that you're currently doing that you can tweak to further support these 4 key strategies, and let them come up with it with you. I guarantee that'll unlock the innovation faucet that you didn't even know existed in your organisation.
Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah.
So this brings us to the end.
Yeah.
Sorry,
once
Martin,
it is seen, it should be disseminated.
Wonderful. So I have the details of the presenters up on screen here, their LinkedIn contacts. So feel free to connect with them today. I'm sure they'll look forward to your connection. So thanks everyone for attending today, and we hope to see you back for our other webinars in the series over the next 3 to 4 months. A list of all our upcoming webinars can be found at boardprohub.com/webinars. You'll receive an email from us as soon as today's session's over, where you'll find a copy of the white paper on this topic, a link to the recording, and the slide deck as presented today. So remember, just as you leave the webinar, don't forget to complete our 1-minute survey, go into the draw to win our beautiful hamper worth $400, and we'll announce the winner fairly shortly after the webinar. So thanks everybody for your attendance, really appreciate your time, and thank you presenters for your time.